The Watchers. Arrival. Chapter 1. The Village in the Fog. The road to Belhaven twisted like a snake, its gravel surface cutting through dense woods that seemed to go on forever. Mist clung to the trees, weaving through the branches like restless spirits. "This is the most remote place we've ever filmed," Ethan Clark muttered from the driver's seat. He glanced at Nina Porter in the passenger seat, his grip tight on the wheel. "You sure about this?" Nina adjusted the camera bag at her feet and gave him a firm nod. "This is the kind of story that puts us on the map, Ethan. No one's covered the Watchers like this before." Ethan sighed, his skepticism barely hidden. Maybe there's a reason for that. Behind them, Claire Devlin sat with her arms crossed, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. She hadn't said much since they picked her up on the edge of the village. "You should turn back," she said suddenly, her voice low. Nina twisted in her seat to look at her. "We're already here. Besides, we're just filming. No one's breaking any rules." Claire's lips tightened. "You don't understand. They don't like strangers, and they don't like people asking questions." "The villagers or the Watchers?" Ethan asked, trying to lighten the mood. Claire didn't smile. The village of Belhaven appeared suddenly, materializing out of the mist, like a forgotten memory. Its streets were narrow and uneven, lined with sagging houses whose shutters seemed permanently closed. Ethan slowed the van as they drove through the center of town. A handful of villagers stood on porches or leaned against fences, their eyes following the newcomers with unmasked suspicion. "They don't look too friendly," Ethan muttered. Nina grabbed her camera, filming through the window. "That's part of the story, a town trapped by superstition." Claire leaned forward, her voice sharp. "Put that down. They won't like it." Nina hesitated but lowered the camera. "You're not exactly selling this place, Claire." "It's not a place you sell," Claire said. "It's a place you survive." Chapter 2. The Watchers. The van stopped on the edge of the forest, where the trees parted to reveal an open field dotted with stone statues. Nina stepped out, pulling her coat tighter against the cold. The statues were spread out irregularly, some half hidden by grass and moss, others standing tall and pristine. "They're just statues," Ethan said, his voice steady but quiet. "They're the Watchers," Claire corrected. Nina approached the nearest one, her camera rolling again. The statue was humanoid but grotesque, its features elongated and its eyes hollow. No matter where she moved, the eyes seemed to follow her, the empty sockets fixed on her every step. "Who made them?" Nina asked. "No one knows," Claire replied, staying several paces back. "They've been here longer than the village, longer than anything." Nina crouched, studying the strange markings carved into the statue's base. The symbols were weathered, but still distinct, sharp lines intersecting in patterns that made her head throb if she looked too long. "Have they ever moved?" Ethan asked, half joking but with an edge of unease. Claire's face darkened. "Not during the day." Nina straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. "What happens at night?" Claire hesitated, her gaze drifting toward the trees. "They watch, and if they catch you..." She didn't finish. Nina exchanged a glance with Ethan. He gave her a small shake of his head, but she ignored it. "This is what we came for," Nina said firmly. "We'll start shooting at sunset." Claire stepped closer, her voice low and urgent. "Don't stay out after dark, I mean it. Once the sun goes down, you need to be inside. Lock the doors, cover the windows, and don't look outside, no matter what you hear." Ethan laughed nervously. "Sounds like a horror movie." "It's not a movie," Claire snapped, her tone icy. "It's the only reason I'm still alive." Chapter 3. Breaking the Rule. Sunset painted the sky in streaks of crimson and gold as Nina adjusted her tripod. The field was bathed in a soft, eerie glow, the statues casting long shadows that stretched toward the forest. "This light is perfect," Nina said, her voice full of excitement. "Ethan, get some wide shots of the statues. We'll do close-ups later." Ethan grumbled but obeyed, his camera panning across the field. The hollow-eyed statues seemed to stare directly at the lens, their features sharper in the fading light. Claire stood at the edge of the field, fidgeting with her coat. "We should leave soon. The sun's almost gone." Nina waved her off. "We'll be fine. Just a few more minutes." Claire stepped closer, her voice rising. "You don't understand. Once it's dark, they—" "Relax, Claire," Liam Hayes interrupted, strolling out of the forest with his phone in hand. "I got some great shots of the trees. Adds to the spooky vibe." "You went into the woods?" Claire demanded, her voice sharp with fear. "Yeah," Liam said, shrugging. "Didn't see anything weird, just trees." Claire grabbed his arm. "Never go into the woods alone. Ever." Liam smirked. "What are you so scared of? They're just statues." The last rays of sunlight disappeared, plunging the field into shadow. A cold wind swept through, rustling the grass and sending a chill down Nina's spine. The statues seemed closer now, their hollow eyes darker, their features sharper. "Ethan," Nina said quietly, "were they this close before?" Ethan turned, his camera still rolling. "What do you mean?" Nina pointed. "Those three. I'm sure they were farther back." Ethan frowned, scanning the footage on his camera. His face paled. They were. 10 seconds ago, they were over there. Claire grabbed Nina's arm. "We have to go. Now." The air grew heavy, and from the forest came a sound, soft at first, but growing louder. A whisper. "Watch, watch, watch." Chapter 4. The Whispering Forest. The whisper grew louder, rolling through the field like the wind, yet unnatural, carrying a single word that seemed to echo in every direction. "Watch, watch, watch." "Where is that coming from?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. Claire grabbed Nina's arm, her fingers digging in. "It's them. It's the Watchers." Nina pulled free, her gaze darting between the statues. "They're just statues. They can't." "Then explain why they moved," Claire snapped. Liam smirked, holding up his phone. "It's a trick, an optical illusion or something. Look, I'll prove it." Before anyone could stop him, Liam walked toward the nearest statue, his phone's flashlight cutting through the growing darkness. "See? It's just stone." "Liam, stop," Claire shouted. But Liam didn't listen. He reached the statue and waved his hand in front of its hollow eyes. Nothing to worry about. Just The whispering stopped. Liam froze. "Liam?" Ethan called, his voice cracking. The statue's shadow stretched unnaturally, wrapping around Liam's legs like tendrils of smoke. He gasped, stumbling backward, but the shadow held him fast. "Help me!" he shouted, his phone dropping to the ground. Nina and Ethan ran toward him, but Claire grabbed their arms, holding them back. "No, don't touch him." "We can't just leave him," Nina yelled, struggling against Claire's grip. Liam's screams cut through the night as the shadow pulled him closer to the statue. The hollow eyes seemed to glow faintly, and the statue's mouth, once sealed shut, opened in a silent scream. And then Liam was gone. His body dissolved into the shadow, leaving nothing but his phone. its flashlight casting a dim glow on the ground. The whispering returned, louder this time, a cacophony of voices chanting, "Watch, watch, watch." Chapter 5. The Village's Secret. The group ran. They didn't stop until they were back in the village, slamming the door of Claire's cottage behind them. The whispering had faded, but the air still felt heavy, as though the forest was pressing in on them. Ethan paced the room, his hands shaking. He's gone. He just vanished. Nina sat on the floor, clutching her camera like a lifeline. "We need to go back. Maybe he's not," Claire interrupted, her voice cold. "The Watchers took him. There's no coming back from that." "What does that mean?" Ethan demanded, his voice rising. "What are they?" Claire hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "They're not just statues. They're ancient, older than the village, older than anything we know. The elders say they're bound to the forest, but they weren't always." Nina's eyes narrowed. "What happened?" Claire took a deep breath. "Centuries ago, the villagers made a deal. The Watchers wanted something. Sacrifices, I think. The villagers agreed, as long as they stayed bound to the forest. But the deal was fragile. If the rules are broken, the Watchers can leave. They'll take anyone they want. And by filming them at night, we broke the rules," Ethan said, his voice hollow. Claire nodded. "Yes." Chapter 6. The Journal. Ethan sat down heavily, his face pale. "So what do we do now? Just wait for them to take us too?" "No," Nina said firmly. She stood, pacing the small room. "There has to be a way to stop this. Something in the legend. Anything." Claire hesitated before crossing the room to a small cabinet. She pulled out an old, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. "This belonged to one of the elders. It's the only record we have of the Watchers and how they were bound." Nina grabbed the journal, flipping through its pages. The handwriting was cramped and uneven, the words difficult to read. She stopped at a page filled with strange symbols and diagrams. "This is it," she whispered. "This is how they were bound." Ethan leaned over her shoulder. "It looks like a ritual. Can we do it again?" Claire shook her head. "It's not that simple. The ritual requires a sacrifice. Someone has to face them, willingly." Silence fell over the room. Nina's eyes met Ethan's. "If we don't do this, they'll keep coming. Not just for us, for the whole village." Ethan swallowed hard. "What if it doesn't work?" Claire's voice was soft. "Then none of us will make it out of here." Chapter 7. Facing the Watchers. The forest was darker than ever as the group returned to the field. The statues were closer now, their hollow eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. Nina held the journal tightly. The instructions burned into her mind. She had memorized every word, every symbol, but doubt still gnawed at her. "What if we're too late?" Ethan whispered. "We're not," Nina said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. Claire stood at the edge of the field, her face pale but determined. "I'll do it." Nina turned to her, startled. "What?" "I'll be the sacrifice," Claire said. "I've lived with this my whole life. I should be the one to end it." "No," Nina said firmly. "We're in this together. We'll figure it out." The statues shifted, their positions changing as the group moved. The whispering grew louder, the air colder. Claire stepped forward, her hands trembling. "Just make sure it works." The Watchers turned their hollow eyes on her, their presence suffocating. Claire knelt in the center of the field, whispering the words from the journal. The symbols glowed faintly on the ground, forming a circle around her. The statues closed in. Nina and Ethan watched in horror as the shadows surrounded Claire, their movements slow and deliberate. She looked up at them, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't flinch. The symbols on the ground flared brightly, and the whispering stopped. For a moment, the forest was silent. Then, with a deafening roar, the statues froze. Their hollow eyes dimmed, and the shadows dissipated into the night. Claire's body slumped to the ground, lifeless. Chapter 8. The Silence After. The glow from the symbols faded, leaving the field bathed in cold moonlight. The statues stood frozen, their hollow eyes dark and lifeless. The suffocating weight in the air lifted, replaced by an eerie stillness. Nina knelt beside Claire's body, her hands trembling. "Claire," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Claire didn't respond. Her face was calm, her eyes closed, as if she had simply fallen asleep. Ethan crouched beside Nina, his expression grim. "Is it over?" Nina looked at the statues, their unmoving forms casting long shadows across the grass. "I don't know." The forest was silent, the whispering gone, but something about the stillness felt wrong, too forced, too final. "We have to leave," Ethan said, his voice tight. "We can't stay here." Nina hesitated, her gaze lingering on Claire. "We can't just leave her here." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "We don't have a choice. If the Watchers wake up again..." He didn't finish. The thought was too terrible to say aloud. Chapter 9. The Village's Grief. The walk back to the village was heavy with guilt and sorrow. The trees seemed less menacing now, their branches no longer clawing at the sky. But every step felt like a betrayal, leaving Claire behind in the field where she had given everything to save them. When they reached the edge of the village, the streets were deserted. The houses loomed in the darkness, their windows shuttered tightly. "They knew this might happen," Ethan muttered. "That's why no one tried to stop us." Nina didn't respond. She carried Claire's journal in her arms, clutching it like a lifeline. The door to Claire's cottage creaked open as they approached. Inside, the air was warm and still, a stark contrast to the cold forest. Nina collapsed into a chair, her head in her hands. "She didn't deserve this," she whispered. Ethan sat across from her, staring at the table. "None of us did. But if it worked..." He trailed off, his eyes dark with doubt. "What if it didn't?" Nina asked, her voice trembling. "What if it was all for nothing?" Chapter 10. The Missing Statue. Morning came slowly, the first rays of sunlight creeping over the forest. The village seemed to exhale, the oppressive weight that had hung over it for generations finally lifting. Nina and Ethan ventured back to the field, their footsteps hesitant. The statues stood exactly where they had been, their forms weathered and still. "Do they look different to you?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Nina nodded. The statues no longer felt alive. Their hollow eyes seemed empty, devoid of the malice that had once radiated from them. She stepped closer to the circle where Claire had performed the ritual. The grass was singed, the symbols from the journal etched faintly into the earth. "It worked," Nina said, her voice filled with quiet awe. Ethan exhaled, relief washing over his face. "She saved us." But as they turned to leave, something caught Nina's eye. One of the statues was missing. "Wait," she said, her heart pounding. "There were 8 of them. Now there's 7. Ethan spun around, his face pale. "What does that mean?" Nina shook her head, fear creeping back into her chest. I don't know. The whispering returned, faint and distant, carried on the wind. Watch, watch, watch. Epilogue. A new watcher. Weeks passed, and the village tried to return to normal. The forest remained quiet, and the statues stood frozen, their hollow eyes no longer glowing. Nina and Ethan left Belhaven, but the events of that night haunted them both. Nina pored through Claire's journal, desperate to understand the missing statue and its implications. One evening, as she sat in her apartment, editing the footage from the forest, she froze. On the screen just behind Liam in one of the early shots, a shadow moved. It wasn't human. It wasn't even fully formed. It was watching. Nina's breath caught as the shadow turned slowly toward the camera, its hollow eyes locking onto hers. The screen flickered, and the video cut to static. Somewhere in the distance, a faint whisper reached her ears. Watch, watch, watch. The end.
I hope you enjoyed the story. Like and subscribe for more. Thank you for wandering the foggy paths of Mistmore with us. Stay curious, but beware what you may uncover in the mist. Farewell, brave souls, from Mistmore Mysteries.